Hello, my friends. So we are continuing our conversations with luminaries and influencers and writers who are making a difference in the world. And my very special guest today is Dr. Scott Lyons. Here's the book. It's called Addicted to Drama, Healing Dependency on Crisis and Chaos in Yourself and Others. So I was very intrigued when this book came to my office. It's not out yet. It'll be out in May, but by the time I think we get this published, the book should be there and we should reach many millions of people. So Dr. Scott Lyons is a licensed clinical psychologist. He's a doctor of osteopathy and he's a mind-body practitioner. He's the creator of the Embody Lab, a hub for embodied education, self-discovery, and healing, and developer of Somatic Stress Release, a process for restoring our biological adaptation system. So before we get into the book, Scott, share with our audience a little bit about your own life story, and then we'll talk about the book.
Yeah. Well, Deepak, I just wanted to say how grateful I am to be here with you. You wouldn't know this, but you actually played an influence in me writing this book.
Oh.
I went to a talk of yours 12 years ago in New York City. Maybe it was 10 or 12 years ago. And you had said something in the talk that resonated so deeply with me that it became a daily practice. And that daily practice became part of my own healing, which then influenced this book. And you had said,
why did you need healing, and what did I say about that?
Yeah, I grew up in a house full of love and chaos, and I wouldn't change it for the world because it taught me so much of how I am and who I am as a practitioner and someone invested in the healing arts now. And I grew up also exploring the arts. I was an actor and I was a dancer, a choreographer, and a director. So I got to explore all arenas of drama. And from the performing arts to the ways I engaged in my relationships as a kid, as a young adult, and as an adult. And the way I was living my life where it didn't feel like a life of ease or accessibility. It felt like a life of challenge wherever I went. And part of what I was interested in exploring my own healing was, why does it feel like challenge is following me wherever I go? Why does it feel like wherever I go, there's a struggle in relationships or a struggle or a stuckness in achieving whatever it is I want or a goal? And so going back to that talk that I attended in New York City 10 or 11 years ago, you were talking about what are you really hungry for, was the question you posed.
Yeah, I remember.
And, even though there was like 5,000 of us in the room, I felt like that question hit me so much in that moment that it allowed me to drop beneath a static and a way of how I was distracting myself from what was underneath, what it was I was really hungry for, what it was the nuance of actually tasting something. Because the way that I was engaging with life was such a distraction from my underlying pain. And asking myself, what am I really hungry for, also meant coming into contact with what it was that I was feeling on a deep level, whether that actually was the intuitive sense of what am I hungry for, metaphorically or actual tangibly. But it allowed me an access point to realize that that was not something I was in touch with.
You're a licensed therapist.
Yeah.
You're helping others.
Yeah.
And you say you had a drama addiction, basically.
I did.
As I've looked at addictions in general, all my life, I kind of in my mind summarized 4 types of addiction. One is the addiction to sensation. That includes everything: food, sex addiction, but basically craving for sensual pleasure,
Yeah.
which if you have, nothing wrong with pleasure, but if you become addicted to it, then it becomes suffering, obviously. So that's number one,
Yeah.
not necessarily in importance of order. The second is the addiction to drama. I think that's how our society actually creates a loss of identity. We get kind of dramatically involved in our story, thinking that the rest of the world should conform to our story. And the third addiction is the addiction for power, which we now see in all these gangsters who we call national leaders. And the fourth addiction is the addiction to security, which is the biggest cause of insecurity.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of interrelated to not being in touch with ourselves.
Yeah.
We're kind of confusing our selfies with ourselves. And that's become the meme of the
Can I
day.
get that on a t-shirt? I love that.
Yeah, I have sacrificed myself for my selfie and depend on how many likes I have, period.
Period.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit why you had this addiction to drama.
Yeah. I can say, an addiction, any addiction, but especially an addiction to drama, we can also ask ourselves the question, what would you do to avoid the pain?
Mm-hmm.
Or what have you done?
Mm-hmm.
And the tricky part is even if we can answer that question cognitively, the response to that question is not something we necessarily chose. And so I didn't choose an addiction to drama. It was the way of surviving. It was my way of avoiding a lot of deep-seated pain and a whole process of really ways of how can I not be with myself? How can I not be with the underlying pain? And how can I not be with the numbness that formed to protect that pain? So when you talked about that first addiction, the addiction to sensation, addiction to drama is not about making sense. It's about making sensation. It's about rising above a certain threshold of numbness to remind ourselves we are still alive, to feel something, to feel something gives us a sense that we exist or that we can belong either to ourselves or to other people. And that's something that's so fundamental to an addiction to drama is we get cut off from ourselves. We get cut off from other people. We get cut off from a sense of belonging. And so what do we fill in the space, in the void of belonging? Some people, like you said, choose gambling, or they choose sex, or they choose sensations. But what is it that is essentially a distraction that fills the gap of that? And, often when we think about trauma, we might think about like the impact, that moment of impact, whether it's too much or too little of an event that overwhelms our nervous system. And what we might not focus on as much is what happens in the liminal space between traumas, or between one trauma and the next perceived trauma. And that's really where the addiction to drama forms, is in that liminal space, in the space in between when we have a trauma or a deep pain. We come to an expectation that there's going to be another. So our whole physiology prepares itself for what's to come and to be on the lookout for what's to come. And so, one of the things that I recognized only after doing my research, but also experienced it as a child and as certainly as a young adult, is the way my senses filtered in primarily the things that were negative, primarily the things that could be a threat to me or a threat to the world. And I focused on that. And then we know, after trauma, in that space in between one trauma and the perceived next, our senses do change. The filters of our reality change. Our sense of timing changes, the pitches we listen for, the smells we become more attuned to, or the taste we become more attuned to. Like we become more attuned to bitter tastes or high-pitched sounds of threat. So it's not that those are the only things in the world, but because our system has adapted to be attuned to those, that is what we take in. And so the world feels like we are being attacked, like the world is coming at us.
So, I have recently been talking to a lot of trauma experts,
Yeah.
and they tell me that everyone's had trauma, that
Yeah.
there's no one who's not had trauma in childhood or maybe even in utero or intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
And that what we call anger is the memory of trauma.
Yeah.
And what we call, hostility is the desire to get even as a result of the anger. And then guilt and shame follow because we blame ourselves.
Yeah.
And that leads to humiliation, and all of the above leads to the
Yeah.
major epidemic of our time, which is depression
Yeah.
and further addiction.
Yeah.
And also, having worked with addicts in the past, I felt that every single addict that I've met is actually seeking some kind of joy or ecstasy or transcendence. And somehow there's a confusion between oblivion and transcendence. So,
Yeah.
the addict is actually a spiritual seeker,
Yeah.
but doesn't know the difference between transcendence and oblivion, or getting out of touch with the joy of experience as it happens, and also the joy of letting go of experience as it happens, because no experience is graspable. It comes and goes.
Yeah.
So, as I look through your book, what I'd like to do is, for the sake of our audience,
Yeah.
and because of the social media constraints we have on some platforms,
Sure.
we need to be succinct and brief. So what I'm going to do is, in order to give a taste to our audience, I'm going to read the chapter headings.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to say like 2 sentences on each. And then, if they like what you say, then they have to buy the book. Otherwise, what's the point? Okay. So let's do that. Okay.
I like this task. Yeah.
Okay. Chapter 1, the storm chaser, the storm creator, identifying someone who is addicted to drama.
Yeah. So those would be the symptoms, the external symptoms, how we recognize someone addicted to drama. They make mountains out of molehills. They make an exaggerated, intensified emotional response, and they pull you into it to be part of that.
Chapter 2, two sides of the coin, how we see people addicted to drama and how they see themselves.
Yeah. And there's an interesting piece around that intensity, that extreme behavior we view people on the outside is actually true. There's a truism when you live in the world of drama, that intensity, that extreme response is justified because that's the way that you are taking in the world.
So interaction with drama creates more drama.
Absolutely.
Basically. Common symptoms and impacts of addiction to drama.
Yeah. So these are individuals who are stuck in a stress response system. In their desire to get relief, as you were talking about, they are creating their own suffering. And those symptoms that they have internally include a sense of constant urgency, the sense that the world is coming at them instead of them being part of the world. They feel out of sync with the world, and there's something always going to happen, or the world is against them, essentially.
And they enjoy sharing their suffering with others. Just like
They love to talk about it.
Huh?
They love to talk about what's happened. They vent a lot.
And enlist you in their suffering.
And they love to enlist you because that's how as we'll get to the next chapter, that's how they feel a sense of belonging.
Correct. So that's chapter 4, the cycle of creation and destruction, drama and relationships.
Yeah.
And that leads to codependency, right?
Yeah. So intimacy involves vulnerability. For those of us who have had trauma, and especially an addiction to drama, vulnerability feels unsafe. So we create ways of relating to other people through enlisting them in our chaos.
And then as we move to part 2, understanding the causes of an addiction to drama, you talk in chapter 5, building the perfect storm, the baseline of an addiction to drama.
Yeah.
Say a couple of words.
Yeah. So these are what creates that constant level of agitation, that the water is never tepid, it's always warm on the verge of boiling. And these are the historic reasons, these are the conditional reasons that create that sort of almost at that boiling point as neutral.
Chapter 7, caught in the grip, when a survival strategy becomes an addiction. You talk about stress. So basically, you use your imagination to resist existence.
Yeah.
You use your imagination to create more stress for yourself and others. And you stop being a creator in a sense. I think the best use of imagination is creativity. The worst use of imagination is stress as a lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely.
The drama cycle, chaos in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
What do you mean, blink of an eye? Just any excuse.
Yeah, well, if you've ever been around someone addicted to drama, and if you haven't, hi.
We all have.
We all have. You might find yourself thinking or saying, whoa, what just happened? Or how did we get from there to there? And why am I suddenly involved? So it happens in the blink of an eye. It feels like you get pulled off your own anchor if you're in proximity to someone. So this is the cycle explaining how on the outside, it feels like it happens so fast, but on the inside, it's a process of building constantly, revving up to that point of unorganized catharsis, and then the withdrawal symptoms that happen that show up like boredom after that big explosion.
In the chapter 9, you go on to talk about overstimulated and underconnected, the global drug of drama. Social media, newspapers,
Yeah.
news in general,
Yeah.
movies, that's all about drama. Entertainment, it's all drama, right?
Drama is the means to attain and capture people's attention because it creates a stress response. So in the brain, it goes, if I create enough drama, if I create enough of it, I will capture and maintain your attention. And then in a consumerist nation, I will be able to sell to you. So it's a system of essentially capitalism in this way that has locked us into the conditions that have created an addiction to drama.
I'm speaking to Dr. Scott Lyons. The book is Addicted to Drama, Healing Dependency on Crisis and Chaos in Yourself and Others. And as we move to part 3, the journey of healing and addiction to drama, the chapters have the following headings: breaking, finding, releasing, and learning, stories of healing, which I found very interesting, milestones of healing, using addicted to drama archetypes to help yourself heal, and finally, a bird in the storm, how to thrive in relation to those with an addiction to drama. Say a little bit about breaking, finding, releasing.
Yeah, it's like any addiction. This one is extremely hard to break, because it's not like, oh, there's the alcohol or there's the gambling that I could tangibly see. When we're creating our own hits, when we're creating our own drug of choice, which is drama, it's extraordinarily hard to notice and see. So getting a wedge in between the reflexive pattern of essentially revving yourself up to keep yourself away from that calmness, that settledness, that ease. Because in that calmness, that settledness, that ease, we're that much closer to the underlying pain and trauma and being in contact with it. So breaking the cycle of an addiction to drama, there's a lot of steps, but essentially the first one is starting to notice, starting to be aware of when you are taking yourself out of ease. Like if you're in a meditation and you start replaying a story of a fight you had with a partner or thinking about your grocery list, anything that you're doing to essentially avoid the settling. And when we talk about settling, it's not just about calmness. Calmness is the entry point into yourself. And inside of yourself is all the historic things that have never been metabolized or processed.
Scott, in a way, I've used some of the techniques you mentioned. So I have a 7-step process when people are experiencing emotional discomfort. And it's as follows. First, you take responsibility, which doesn't mean guilt or shame. It just means the ability to respond creatively. You commit to that. Second, you witness the pain in your body. Third, you label it. What is it you're feeling? Whether it's depression or anxiety or fear or whatever. Fourth, you write down your story as you perceive it. Fifth, you write down the same story, pretending you're the other part of the drama. Sixth, you rewrite down the story, thinking you're a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, have no investment on either side. Sixth, then you share it with somebody that you love or trust. Finally, you release it through a ritual, whether it's a breathing exercise or celebration or, physical activity or some kind of psychological ritual. And finally, you celebrate the release and move on. That's worked for me, and it seems very similar to what you're saying. But my final question is, one can do all that, and the sympathetic overdrive continues. So what do you think of actually some very simple, practical things like exercise, like changing your diet, like mind-body coordination, breathing techniques, yoga, tai chi, martial arts, or even, following a diet that's anti-inflammatory, or making sure you sleep well. What do you think of these very simple strategies that now we are seeing are part of a whole system that we've ignored, which is the parasympathetic nervous system? And now we know that muscle exercises, facial exercises, eye exercises, humming, toning, chanting, putting your awareness to your heart, taking deep breath, changing your diet, as I said, but also doing some, in yoga, there are these bandhas and kriyas that stimulate different branches of the vagus nerve. And just making sure that you get enough rest, because people are just constantly on the go with, they say they have no time. And I say, if you have no time, then you need it even more. If you know time to meditate once a day, you should do it twice a day. You need it more. Do you help people with techniques that go beyond, say, reflective inquiry and emotional, release with all these other strategies as well? I would like to know what's your opinion on this.
I mean, all of them, because there's not going to be one single technique that helps someone bring safety into rest. So when we talk about, the parasympathetic has been so ignored, I mean, if we look at it in relationship to an addiction to drama, coming into the resting and digesting means we're coming closer into relationship with our emotional self and the things that haven't been digested. And so there's been a real reason to avoid that, and that becomes a sense of survival for many of us, and especially in an urgency culture like we live in now. And that's what I mean, like the conditions of our culture are now mimicking that, which create an addiction to drama. And one of my favorite practices might have come from you again, from 12 years ago that I started doing after that talk, which was taking the time to taste my food. So I would do 2-hour meditations of eating a single apple. And that shifted a lot for me because especially in the rush culture and my own propensity to sort of bulldoze through life, food didn't have flavor. life didn't have flavor unless it was in these extremes. And so coming down to really taste the flavors of food, to bringing myself into the textures of it, really slowed me down. And in that process of slowing down, I kept saying to myself, is this safe? Not always. Is this safe enough? And that was the key. Is this safe enough to slow down, taste the flavors of food, taste the flavors of life that were not spiced by drama or spiced by stress or spiced by urgency? And in doing that, it created more space for me to fill into me. So that void of that, where I didn't feel like I really existed in this world, where I felt out of sync. And I know so many of us feel out of sync with each other or out of sync with the world. Part of it is we're experiencing something that isn't happening in the world around us. I'm living in a chronic stress response. And if the world around me isn't as well, I feel out of sync with it. So I go and I seek or create the places to which will match my inner state. And that's part of the addiction to drama. We don't even know we're doing it. We just thrive, or we just desire so much a sense of belonging and being in sync.
My very special guest has been Dr. Scott Lyons, and this book is very practical, and I feel everyone will see either they are addicted to drama or somebody in their life is addicted to drama. Yeah. And what this book does is it tells us what drama addiction is and what it is not. It shows us how to identify patterns of drama addiction in ourselves and others, the physical, psychological, and social effects of drama addiction, chronic fatigue, autoimmune illness, joint and muscle pains, social isolation, and other conditions. If you've experienced this, then take notice. It could be your addiction to drama. Also, where drama emerges from and how we are heading toward a global pandemic of drama addiction. And then very practically, Scott Lyons outlines steps for coping and recovery. The book is out, and please get a copy. It could save your life. Scott, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.